Ooh, scary. That's not really scary, that's just a noise. This is episode 289 of the NOTCAST, where a guy called Mark, in a room, in a house, somewhere in England, talks about his record collection, primarily because British TV evening options are pretty poor, and it largely involves crime, murders, crime, and some crime as well, or Hitler, depending upon what channel you're watching. Generally, British evening television is not particularly good, so I've decided to start making my own not particularly good television with fair to middling success, in so much as if I were a band, we'd be called a sleeper hit, i.e. a cult niche band that some people have heard of, less people like, and even fewer people buy the records of. Today, I'm talking about the second studio album by a band that I quite like, and those of you who can read the episode titles and see the t-shirts can already tell that I'm going to be talking about Pink Floyd and their second studio record, Saucerful of Secrets, which was released on the, let me quickly check, 28th of June 1968, which really doesn't seem like 55 years ago, because that happened 5 years before I was born, which is a bit weird. I think about it. When I was younger, I was snobbier, and I was like, I'm not going to listen to music that's been made before I was born, because the idea of, as Echo Belly once had it, I can't imagine a world without me. The idea of history existing before my existence just seemed bizarre and strange. Who could possibly be interested in anything that happened before I was born? There's a huge amount of things that have happened after I'm born that I'm not interested in, let alone all the things that happened before I was born. But that was my very unusual kind of attitude towards time, I think. I used to think about the concept of chronology and time and things like 1968 when I was 15 in 1988. 1968 was only 20 years in the rear view mirror, which to me 20 years ago now is, oh, pardon me, I wasn't expecting to do that. 20 years ago now is like a blink of an eye. I'm like, surely everybody remembers 2002, and end up going, if you were born in 2002, you could be 21 now. So the idea of something happening in 1968 when I was 15 just seemed ancient. Who would possibly be interested in that archaeology? Not even Kraftwerk. So, Saucerful of Secrets, the second studio record by the Pink Floyd. And why does it all have to be so terribly loud? Because everything has to be louder than everything else, as the great Motorhead once had it. We pick up the story late 1967, early 1968. And I'm going to talk about this band from a historical perspective, because I wasn't a Pink Floyd fan at this point. Clearly, I didn't even exist. I wasn't even a glimpse or a glint in my father's eye. I was probably a terrified, tiny little concept in my father's eye of going, I guess I'm going to be a dad at some point. And lo and behold, here I am. Whereas, obviously, at the time, I only know about this stuff looking at it in the rearview mirror. So the idea for me of that and history is I wasn't a fan of this era of Pink Floyd until relatively recently. So I got into this era of Pink Floyd probably around 2002, 2003, over 10 years after I started listening to the band, because I went as far back as Dark Side of the Moon, and I figured they're only playing songs from Dark Side of the Moon onwards, so they probably think all that stuff that they recorded beforehand is terrible and shouldn't be listened to, in the same way that lots of bands don't play much of their earlier stuff because they're embarrassed by it. If you're a Depeche Mode fan, for example, they've only played 2 songs from Speak and Spell live since, I think, 1988. So in the past 34 years, they've only played 2 songs, those being Photographic and Just Can't Get Enough. So everything else that's on Speak and Spell must be terrible. Now, in my opinion, almost everything else on Speak and Spell is terrible. But that is not the subject that we're talking about today. And so therefore I was like, well, why should I listen to metal or Obscured by Clouds or Saucerful of Secrets? They don't play that stuff live. That stuff's probably not very good. So on a limited budget, long before the invention of streaming, had the view that I could only really listen to it if I could afford it, wanted to buy it, and had the money to buy it, and had the inclination to do so. And that £3 CD, I could have spent that on beer instead, and I could have spent it on having a drink and maybe meeting a nice man or woman and then kissing them. And so therefore I wasn't going to listen to A Saucerful of Secrets. I changed my mind over time. And so obviously here I am to rue the day now, having grown to quite like this album over the 20 or something years since I last bought it. So pick up the tale with the release in November 1967 of Apples and Oranges. I think the last single that was released whilst Syd was officially a member of the band. This is the reproduction 7-inch that comes inside the Early Years box set. On the grounds that I bought the Early Years box set, and that means I don't have to buy the singles or the early singles if I don't really want to, and I don't really want to because I don't have to, because here they are. But this is Apples and Oranges, backed with Paintbox by Richard Wright. And at this point the band were dividing up their individual writing skills. Paintbox by Richard, Apples and Oranges by Barrett, the last A-side that he wrote for the band. Although he did write Scream Thy Last Scream, Old Woman with a Casket, and Vegetable Man, neither of which got released until 2010, and then later got released on the Early Years box set. But Apples and Oranges is actually, it's a lovely little song. Lovely, silly, whimsical, very, very British. And when I listen to it, and I've listened to a lot of early 60s kind of stuff, a lot of the earlier David Bowie stuff, a lot of the earlier Beatles stuff, a lot of the earlier Pink Floyd stuff relatively recently, going through and revisiting parts of my record collection. I've been really pleased with how good some of this stuff is. I thought, in my snobby mind, they don't play Apples and Oranges because it's awful. Au contraire, mon frère, I think this is a brilliant British single. And but what it was is that it's so incredibly unusual in the way in which the language is constructed, the way in which the parts fit together. And you think about writing a song, most bits of a song are, you've got your intro, you've got your verse, you've got a chorus, you've got an instrumental break, you've got another verse, you've got another chorus, you've got a bridge, maybe a guitar solo if you're really lucky, second chorus, and then there's your end. However, of course, if you are Pink Floyd, you've got about 40 verses, so especially on some of the longer songs. But that's not really the point. The point is those bits just don't naturally fit together. It feels like it's about 3 songs arguing at once, which is particularly true for the last track on Saucerful of Secrets, which is the only track to feature lead vocals by Syd. But I'm jumping ahead of myself here. Obviously, in December 1967, David Gilmour, a guitarist of no small local repute, was asked to play guitar and vocals with the Pink Floyd to help whilst Syd was unreliable, is I think the technical term, in terms of live performances. They had considered Jeff Beck, apparently, but they asked David, and David was known to a couple of the members of the group and grew up not too far away from them in Cambridge. And so Syd's last gig with the band, I think was in Hastings, or maybe it was the first gig without Syd. They played 5 shows with Syd and David together as a 5-piece. They did 1 photo shoot, not an amazing one, but it's the one that's used on a lot of the releases because it's the only one that features all 5 members of the group. And then one day, apparently they were driving towards a show, and they decided not to pick Syd up and not to play the show with him, but to play as a 4-piece without Syd. Now, at that point, I think it's fair to say that they had an issue of the work. And the work is, when you get an opportunity in your life, you get one shot to get it right. Don't screw it up by saying, oh yeah, I'm going to go out for a KFC, and then just walk out before the band signed a deal. Don't go and screw up your one shot, as Eminem had it. There was the issue of the work. There was an opportunity that the band had been working for all their life, and the idea was, if you get this opportunity and you don't screw it up, you cannot have to work a day job for the rest of your life. You can work creatively, you can work in music, you can do something that thousands, if not millions of people in the UK, if they had the opportunity to do so, would grasp with both hands and eager enthusiasm. If I had any musical skill whatsoever, for example, I undoubtedly would have ruined my life trying to make music that nobody would have liked and less people would have bought. But I would have found myself in a situation where if I had the opportunity, this is an opportunity that comes once in a lifetime, take it. Do not muff it up, because there are hundreds of people behind you in the queue who would very, very gladly trade places with you and take that opportunity and run with it right now without hesitation. But what happened was that the band had this opportunity, and they were like, well, Do we let the opportunity slip between our fingers because one member of the group isn't working in the way in which we would want them to? Or do we replace that one member? And it's a huge question to ask. It's a question having a key leaving member, a key integral member of the band leaving very, very early in a band's lifespan is something that has happened to a couple of other bands. It's a big quandary. There's always the question of, is the band going to survive after that? We had it with, as I've mentioned before, Depeche Mode. Vince Clarke, the main songwriter for Depeche Mode in 1980, left the group in early 1981. Well, actually December 1981, playing his last show in Chichester, of all places. And then the band carrying on without their main songwriter, hoping that the other guy in the band that could write songs, Martin Gore, would somehow magically pull an album's worth of stuff out of his backside and make it work. The confidence with which that takes, there's an element of confidence which is very close to arrogance, but also an element of self-belief, saying, well, if nothing else, what have we got to lose? We could tour, we could, play live shows for a while, we could make another record, we'd have some songs, maybe they wouldn't be great. What happens? Suede had it when Bernard Butler left and Richard Oakes joined and became the band's main guitarist. Richie Edwards from the Manic Street Preachers had left at during the Holy Bible era. After the band released their third LP, there was no guarantee that the songs would come after that. It happens more times than you might think. And the idea is, that a band loses its main songwriter, and then there's an element or a question of, well, what makes the band work? What makes the band successful? How does that happen? Are we going to have the songs? And the short answer is, I don't know, but we're going to try it and we're going to find out, because if the band had relied on Syd, they undoubtedly would have sputtered to a halt in early 1968, and they'd be thought of as a one and done, absolutely fascinating and obscure British band that not enough people knew about. They didn't have at the time as well, there was no real discussion around mental health. There was no discussion around mental health conditions, illnesses, depression, anxiety, ADHD, schizophrenia, anything like that. It was all just a weirdo and a nutter and doesn't make sense. Nobody had the tools to understand. In those days, there wasn't enough dialogue around it. People weren't able to look at things and go, oh, yeah, he's got that. He's presenting all the symptoms of that. Bearing in mind that what you'd have to do is you'd have to wait for a diagnosis of somebody, and that somebody wouldn't necessarily always have the time or the ability to do so. And, of course, I'm always reminded of, there's a graph, which is the number of people that were left-handed in the US, and it started off at like about 12%, and then it went down to about 4%, and that was the time when they started to tie people's left hands behind their backs and make them write with their right hands, and then after they stopped doing that, lo and behold, the number of people that were left-handed went back up to 12%, and the answer is they were always there. You were just pretending that they weren't there. These conditions always existed. The idea that people have depression and somehow it's trending to have depression is nonsense. It's been a thing that's always been part of human life. Just people haven't necessarily had the tools or the understanding to be able to articulate, identify, discuss and treat it correctly and accurately. And also worth remembering, when you're 22, 23, even now, I guess you maybe wouldn't have the tools to fully grasp or understand exactly what's happening to you, which you had even less of in the 60s, when there was fundamentally no understanding around what mental health would be. So Syd officially left the group on the 5th of April 1968, and so his recorded history with Pink Floyd, from the first note of Arnold Layne to the last day that he was a member of Pink Floyd, is just 12 months. It's over very, very quickly, but he left a huge shadow over the rest of the band's recorded activity. And certainly at the time when he's leaving the group was announced, it was probably announced because it'd be the release of the next single, the band's fourth single, It Would Be So Nice, here on the Pink Floyd early years 7-inch reproduction, 7-inch single from the Super Mega box set, on which says it's on Columbia, but clearly obviously isn't. The release of It Would Be So Nice was imminent, and there was no way in which the band could possibly kind of promote It Would Be So Nice and then go, yeah, Syd's a semi-detached member of the group. they have to go, no, sorry, there's not a Syd anymore. And so on the 19th of April 1968, just 2 weeks and a day after Syd's official departure on the 5th of April, was here. And It Would Be So Nice, the first A-side, I think, written by Richard, backed with Julia Dream, written by Roger Waters. And both of those are not amazing songs. It Would Be So Nice feels a lot like a lot of the earlier Bowie songs. It feels like there's a band that's trying to find its new artistic identity. It has lost its major voice in terms of what it does and how it does it. And it's kind of going, well, what are we going to do next? There's not necessarily a crisis of confidence, but there's an identity crisis there, in so much as the band are trying to kind of like portray what they're going to do and how they're going to do it. So people aren't necessarily sure, well, what is Pink Floyd anyway? How does that work? And trying to kind of like identify and spread out what they are and how they're going to write, and what type of song is going to write. And by the way, It Would Be So Nice is quite good, although obviously seems quite closely related to Wouldn't It Be Nice, that lovely song by the Beach Boys, who also had a member who left, although obviously I think Brian Wilson went to stay at home and write songs separately. I don't know where in the chronology whether It Would Be So Nice comes after Wouldn't It Be Nice. It seems a bit obvious, really. It could explain why It Would Be So Nice wasn't on a Pink Floyd CD for many, 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 many years indeed. And the B-side is Julia Dream. Not a great song at all. In fact, one so not great, I've totally forgotten its existence in the slightest. And so on the 28th of June 1968, the second Pink Floyd record was released, A Saucerful of Secrets, as previously identified here. This time, I better put the cover art the right way up. Now, one thing I will say about the cover art, by the way, and what is little known, is this actually features an appearance by a Marvel superhero. His name is Doctor Strange. Hang on, I'll be back. And it features 3 pages, or more correctly, 3 images on the cover, taken from a page illustration from the Doctor Strange Marvel comic. So over here we have the planets here, up here in the top corner, way up there you can see a character called the Living Tribunal, and down here, let's quickly check it, you might have to change your contrast here, is Doctor Strange himself. Luckily, I've downloaded a picture off the internet for you, which makes it much, much easier for you to be able to see where each one of these characters comes from. So A Saucerful of Secrets is cover art featuring Doctor Strange himself there, and the planets and the Living Tribunal from a 1968 issue of one of the Doctor Strange comics. So there you go, that's your Marvel connection, and somehow just subtly kind of threw that in there and nobody really noticed it was there. So there we are, A Saucerful of Secrets. And this was released, as I've said before, June 1968, but it was recorded between August 1967 and I think the last bit of recording was February 1968. So after Syd had become a semi-detached member of the band. The first 2 songs recorded for the album, Set the Controls for the Heart of the Sun and Scream Thy Last Scream, were recorded in Abbey Road on the 7th and 8th of August 1967. That was planned as a single in September 1967 but vetoed, and then they went in and did some overdubs in October, and that was at the time when the Beatles were recording material for their Beatles album, Abbey Road. So the band Pink Floyd were in Abbey Road Studio 2, the Beatles were in Studio 1 recording the Beatles, and then when Pink Floyd recorded Vegetable Man on the 9th to 11th of October 1967, the Beatles were in Studio 1 doing mixes for the Yellow Submarine film soundtrack. So quite an important day there for them. And then on 19th of October 1967, one of the last recordings by the band with Syd. Then they were doing Jug Band Blues, the last Syd Barrett vocal, which is the last song on Saucerful of Secrets. The Beatles were in the other room recording Hello Goodbye. They also recorded the initial version. There's a song called Remember a Day, which was recorded during the Piper at the Gates of Dawn sessions, then later overdubbed on the 19th of October 1967, while the Beatles, I think, were in India, and then on Apples and Oranges. Apples and oranges, recorded on the 26th to 27th of October 1967, released a month later, and that was at the time when the Beatles were recording Fall on the Hill in the studio on the other side of the corridor. Set the Controls and Scream Thy Last Scream was again revisited by the Sydless version of the band on the 10th and 12th of January 1968. And then there's a song called Seesaw, which at the time was called the most boring song I've ever heard, bar one, which is written by Rick Wright. Track 6 was recorded on the 24th and 25th of January 1968. Then there was Let There Be More Light, Corporal Clegg, so a version of Seesaw without Syd, and those are in January 68, although Syd do slide guitar on Let There Be More Light. And then that was it. The LP was finished, and it came out in June. So we have a 7-song LP here by the Pink Floyd, and I think it's probably, although it's Nick Mason's favourite Pink Floyd album, it's not my favourite Pink Floyd album. It is an unusual album which has a number of styles and a number of multitudes. Now, there's 3 tracks which I think Syd and David appear on. There's one Syd vocal, and there's at least one song which doesn't have David on either. So what we've got, let's go through it. It starts off with Let There Be More Light. Let There Be More Light, if you don't know, it has a wonderful bass line, which sounds very much like Block Rockin' Beats by the Chemical Brothers. It's a fast, heavily picked, fast kind of bass run that actually, when it's played in a nightclub, and I've heard it played in a nightclub, sounds phenomenal. A song that really, really needs to get a lot more love than it actually does. It doesn't get enough respect, like Saint Anger. And Let There Be More Light is I think a song which is written by, I can't be ambiguous about this, it's written about something because someone's got to write about something. It's not a song that's about anything, if that makes any sense. There's no life experience that's in there. It's about the descent of a spacecraft to RAF Mildenhall, which was a UK Air Force base, and alleged reports around the descent of a spacecraft there, taking its hint from the Foo Fighters, which was a name which was used in the Second World War to describe UFOs. And UFOs apparently started appearing after the Earth started dropping atomic bombs and testing them from 1945 onwards, which is when the first time that UFOs were apparently seen, because with the development of the atom bomb and therefore nuclear technology, mankind became capable, in theory, of spaceflight, conquering the stars, and therefore drew its attention, or more correctly, it's the attention of all occupants of interplanetary spacecraft, which the Carpenters were clearly calling to a few years later, was brought towards this planet because they'd now started using nukes. And they were like, okay, we better go and check this planet out, find out what's going on here, which is a strange way of looking at it. And that's your first song, is about potentially aliens landing on Earth and terrorising the suburban Middle England kind of occupants or population of a dull, boring British countryside town. It's interesting. It's a strange concept, but there you are. And then it's followed up by, because as I've said, I think Barrett gets one writing credit on this album for Jug Band Blues. So effectively, you've got lead songs written, or songs written solely by Roger Waters, Rick Wright, and Syd, alongside a band composition which is a Saucerful of Secrets, and all the members play on that in their various forms, including Gilmour. I think Syd plays on the Saucerful of Secrets as well, a little bit, but not very much. We have Remember a Day, which I've said is a reheated outtake from Piper at the Gates of Dawn. Hasn't been played live recently, apart from once in 2008 by David Gilmour on Later with Jules Holland. That's a Rick song. Set the Controls for the Heart of the Sun, the oldest song that Roger Waters plays live. We've got Corporal Clegg, the first of Roger's war songs. There's many, 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 many more to come. But it's the first song that kind of talks about the outcome and consequences of the Second World War. And the Second World War only ended 23 years before this. So you think about the midpoint between 1988 and 1945 would have been sometime in 1967, probably August 1967, when this album started being recorded, which is a strange period to think about in terms of the concept of history and time and everything that goes with it. Time is a strange, strange, strange beast. If you think about halfway back in your life to when you were exactly half the age that you are now, I mean, for some of you, obviously, it's going to be like 14 years ago. I'm just jealous of your hair. And for some of you, it's going to be, 1993. So just try not to think too much about time and how it really fucks with your head. Sorry to use a rude word there. We had then on side 2, we've got A Saucerful of Secrets, the title song, the first one of the big Pink Floyd epic. So it's 12 minutes, 4 parts. I think it takes at least some of it. There's a big, lovely section of drum rolls, which is effectively a remix or a revisit of the track Nick's Boogie, taken from the soundtrack to London 1966-67. And then there's this wonderful section, kindly called Celestial Voices on set lists, which is this wordless, crooning kind of epic. And really, when you listen to that part of Saucerful of Secrets, you kind of think, okay, so if there's a part of a band's career where you want a band to go more in one direction, it's probably that, which is good, because you later on have Atom Heart Mother and Echoes, both of which lean heavily into that kind of keening, yearning, kind of climbing in a mountain type kind of structure. Total prog, of course, and prog, dirty word, because you then think about bands like Wishbone Ash, Genesis, Jethro Tull, and other terrible acts which I've never knowingly, consciously listened to. And there's a couple more tracks which were recorded around about the same time in the same sessions. One of which is, I think, it might be on this, which is the Germination CD and DVD and Blu-ray set that came as part of the early years and was later released as effectively an expanded version of the outtakes from A Saucerful of Secrets. Now, if you're going, well, why aren't there kind of, expanded multi-disc editions of A Saucerful of Secrets? The 1968 set here on the early years is effectively that expanded version, and it features, photographs and nice, well, I would say nice, but they're not really nice, pictures of musicians and people much younger than they now are today. And the CD on here features Point Me at the Sky, It Would Be So Nice, Careful With That Axe Eugene, Song 1, Roger's Boogie, a radio session from June 1968, a radio session from December 1968 as well, and a track called In the Beechwoods is on one of the other tracks. It's on one of the other early years disc releases, alongside the Jonathan Latham sessions, which were also recorded in some sessions that later turned out to be Saucerful of Secrets. The BBC sessions are on this bootleg release, Light the Fuse, Top Gear, June 1968, and on the flip side, the John Peel session from December 1968 as well. Now you could go, why isn't there a Pink Floyd at the BBC box set? Well, there kind of is. It's just all in the early years instead. And then we have, that's, the 7 tracks on the album, the last one, and the last, by the way, this is the nice pair, so I should probably get that out in a second, I think. The last track on the album then is Jug Band Blues, the last lead vocal by Syd Barrett on a Pink Floyd album. And it opens with the line, "It's awfully considerate for you to think of me here, especially when I'm not here." And that's a strange way of going, effectively vacating his position in the band and resigning on record. It's a really strange song, because it's Sid effectively going, I'm out of here, bye. Much like REM's Electrolyte, which opens with the, or more correctly, ends with the lyric, "I'm out of here." It's effectively Syd's resignation song, going, "I'm not here." And there's a section in the middle when you've got, I think the Salvation Army band play kazoos, for example, and it's all a bit strange and a bit weird, and it's you kind of listen to it and you go, where else can you go creatively after that? It's such a strange place for it to exist. You know, the idea of a chorus and a verse and a bridge, and you listen to it and kind of go, that man was not had a, oh, to quote PM Dawn, reality used to be a friend of his. He was not playing with the same cards that everybody else was. That's the correct way of describing it. Now, that's Saucerful of Secrets, the second Pink Floyd album. I think it's really interesting. It's not great at all. Good, yes. Great, no. And a curious album because it effectively features two lineups of Pink Floyd existing at the same time. So David Gilmour plays on 5 songs and Syd Barrett plays on 3 songs, and then there is one song which they play both on, which is Set the Controls for the Heart of the Sun. I think the earlier songs, so Set the Controls, Jug Band Blues, Remember a Day feature Syd on, and then obviously Let There Be More Light and Corporal Clegg and Cecil and Saucerful of Secrets have David on as well, and he's also on Set the Controls. So Set the Controls is the only song that features both David and Syd at the same time, which might be one of the reasons why it's been played so often and features on a lot of compilations. Because for all the talk and all the pictures of Pink Floyd being a 5-piece band, they only did 5 gigs, recorded 1 song and one photo session in that configuration. They probably should have done more, but there you are. That's a Saucerful of Secrets. Now, I don't have a Saucerful of Secrets on vinyl, apart from the Nice Pair. Oh yeah, there's a rude. Sorry about that. So a Nice Pair has as I said, is a repackage of Piper at the Gates of Dawn and Saucerful of Secrets together in double album configuration in 1974 to kind of exploit, I think it's probably the best way to describe it, is to take advantage of the band's newfound commercial success in the light of Dark Side of the Moon and sell some old stuff. It's a good record, actually, this. I've never felt the need to own Saucerful of Secrets on vinyl separately, or Piper at the Gates of Dawn. It's a decision I still stand by. I probably shouldn't have done. I probably should have bought the mono mixes of Piper at the Gates of Dawn that were issued for Record Store Day in 2016, and Saucerful of Secrets that were issued for Record Store Day in 2018. But ultimately, I couldn't be bothered. So sometimes that is the reason why I don't do or don't have a record. There was a single that was released in America, Let There Be More Light. I don't have it. It's difficult to find, in good condition, and difficult to find affordably. Instead, I do have, as part of the early years box set, the 5th single and the band's last UK single until their number 1 in 1979, "Point Me at the Sky." And "Point Me at the Sky," released December the 6th, according to this flyer, which is inside the early years box set as well. Was released with, I think, a picture sleeve in some countries. I do wonder why there isn't a Pink Floyd 7-inch singles box set, actually. That would be the type of thing that people really would be quite keen on releasing. If the Beatles can do it, so can you, by the way. But it's "Point Me at the Sky" is a thoroughly reasonable Pink Floyd song. But again, it sounds a little bit like they're trying to find their direction. What songs are we going to write? What are they going to sound like? And I think "Point Me at the Sky" might have been the first Waters Gilmour joint co-write, actually, because although Saucerful of Secrets title track is credited to all 4 members of the band, most songs are credited individually and not to every member of the band together, which of course has meant, as Queen fans will know, is that sometimes you've got to put the drummer's song on the B-side of your biggest selling single, even though "I'm in Love with My Car" is not an amazing song by any stretch of the imagination. So that's the 5 singles, the 3 during the Saucerful of Secrets period, "Apples and Oranges," "It Would Be So Nice," and "Point Me at the Sky." Alongside Saucerful of Secrets itself, we had, in 2016, we had the early years box set, as mentioned here. Hang on. The early years box set. with the fantastic echo effect there, and that contained two parts of the package which would be of interest. This is Germination, effectively the extra songs that would have been on an expanded version of A Saucerful of Secrets had it got a multi-disc release, and this features on the audio part of the disc. Let me quickly go through the track listing here. Again, those four songs for Point Me at the Sky, It Would Be So Nice, Julia Dream, and the single version of Careful with That Axe, Eugene, also known as Coming Number 51, Your Number Is Up. Two unreleased songs from the studio, Roger's Song, recorded on the 22nd of August 1968 in LA, and Song One and Roger's Boogie, both recorded in Los Angeles, both utterly forgettable, and two BBC radio sessions. So that's Careful with That Axe, Eugene, previously known as Murderotic Women, The Masked Gadgets of Hercules, also known as A Saucerful of Secrets, Let There Be More Light, and Julia Dream, and then the December session, which has Point Me at the Sky, Embryo, and Interstellar Overdrive, one of the few studio recordings of Embryo that's circulating, because no official version of Embryo was completed. There is an official studio recording of it that was released on the Works compilation in 1983, but that's only half of the song, because the Embryo was played live by Pink Floyd with a vast frequency up until about 1971, and ranged in length between 3 minutes and 30 minutes, depending on what mood they were in and what time the curfew was and when the last bus was. The DVD and Blu-ray that comes in this session features 6 or 7 mimed songs by David miming along to Syd's parts, shot in and around Brussels near the Atomium, the promotional film for Apples and Oranges, some live material recorded in Paris, some TV shows, and some stuff from Paris as well, and some TV appearances, running for a total of 84 minutes. It's not amazing, nor would you expect it to be, but it is what it is, as they say. There are a couple of other releases which came out around about the same time, or more correctly, which covered around about the same period. So what we do have is we have a missing Pink Floyd album from about 1969, which, in my opinion, should contain all of the non-album material that's on the singles. Those singles being, of course, Arnold Lane, See Emily Play, Apples and Oranges, It Would Be So Nice, and Point Me at the Sky. And there are, let's think. Okay, so you'd have to take, I think, Scarecrow off that, but everything else, you'd have 9 non-album tracks, which would easily have made Pink Floyd album number 1.5. Throw in maybe an extra couple of unreleased material, and really Pink Floyd did themselves out of a studio album, which I think would have been actually very, very good. If you're a fan of the band, you have a number of options. This was the released in 1970. It was, depending on who you talk to and what country it was released in, it could have been called The Best of Pink Floyd. It was also called Masters of Rock, and this is a version that was released in Germany on vinyl in about 1973, again to capitalise on the success of Dark Side of the Moon. And this featured Arnold Lane, Candy and a Currant Bun, and the whole of side 2 was songs not previously on a Pink Floyd album. Apples and Oranges, It Would Be So Nice, Paintbox, Julia Dream, See Emily Play. So 7 songs not on any other Pink Floyd album. So if you think about an album that's effectively Pink Floyd's Hatful of Hollow, Masters of Rock, which later got an expanded release of Relics, is pretty much the thing to go for. This has not been on CD, it's only been on vinyl, but it sold a lot of copies and is available relatively cheaply, so you can pick it up for maybe 15, 20 quid. That, I think, really kind of covers the period which we're talking about, apart from the box set bait. So in the box set of the early years, the only part of it that wasn't released anywhere else aside from the reproduction 7-inch singles and some memorabilia reproductions was this continuation, a CD of lower quality, and a DVD and Blu-ray as well, which featured lower quality stuff. So for this, for example, the CD features the BBC radio session from September 1967 and December 1967, and the BBC radio session from December 1968, alongside some recordings that have been lost in the midst of time. So Moonhead, for example, when man landed on the moon in 1969, Pink Floyd did the soundtrack and improvised the live soundtrack that went out. But since there's the tapes weren't kept, the only versions that exist are recordings off television, which in those days, as you can imagine, was less than optimum quality. The DVD features actually nothing from the Saucerful of Secrets period at all. It also features The Committee, a film from 1969, and the films More and The Valley, both of which I will come back to in future episodes. That is Pink Floyd's A Saucerful of Secrets, which is, in my opinion, a thoroughly decent, curious album. It's neither fish nor flesh, to quote the great Terence Trent D'Arby, or whatever he wants to be known as this week. Sorry, I can't remember. It is a strange, weird, interregnum album recorded by two versions of the band as it turns from one version into another, with all the attendant weirdness that comes with it. The easiest way to describe it would be is if you were a fan of Depeche Mode and Suede, if somehow during the middle of the recording of, let's say, the follow-up to Speak and Spell, the band had changed, or the follow-up to Dogman Star, halfway through the band changed lineup and just carried on as if nothing had happened, boldly going forward because they couldn't find reverse, and somehow you'd got to a record that felt that it didn't have a cohesive identity of its own. It's the only Pink Floyd album that features multiple lineups and a transition period for the group. It's really, really interesting if you're a fan of the band, because you can hear both what each of the respective members brought to the group, and you can also clearly hear Syd Barrett disengaging from the rest of the band while still being a member of it. It is a really interesting period of the group. I think I've said that about 14 times, so I should probably stop. So with that, I'm going to wrap up here and say thank you for watching this if you made it to the end of it. More interesting Pink Floyd content is coming. I hate the word content. It's a terrible word. This isn't content. This is just a man talking to his mobile phone about his records. It's not that content. I mean, really, that sounds like, I don't know, padding that you put inside a cardboard box to stop whatever you've ordered from Amazon from bashing around and getting broken on the inside. And this isn't that. I don't know what this is, but it's not that at all. So as the late great Jerry Springer would say, take care of yourselves and each other. Stay beautiful. I will see you all again soon. Okay. Yeah, right. So that's where I'm going to hang up. Thank you and bye. Oh, I forgot. Like, subscribe. Do subscribe. Once I get to 1,000 subscribers, I might be able to make some money out of it. So far I've made nothing. I'd like to make about, at least 13p. So if you can subscribe, it costs you nothing and it takes me a little bit closer to my goal. That would be lovely. Okay, goodbye, cruel world. I'm leaving you today. Goodbye, goodbye, goodbye.